Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're hailing from. Welcome to another edition of the Level Up Hour here on OpenShift TV. I am Chris Short, executive producer of OpenShift TV. I speak so quick sometimes that I don't even realize what words I'm saying because I'm so used to this. Langdon, how you doing this morning, buddy?
Yes. Well, I'm now a little concerned because I feel like I've been diminished in your eyes because I'm not apparently illustrious today. So I'm
Oh,
just gonna say,
shoot, I'm so sorry. The
you know,
illustrious Langdon White, everybody.
thank you, thank you.
And he's and you've brought on a guest.
I know, yeah, that's what I'm super excited about. And I also speak very quickly. I normally know what I'm saying, but if I don't have the word "wicked" in basically every sentence, I feel like not a proper Bostonian. So
There
I
is
have to get the
that,
wickeds in.
yes.
So Brent Baude is here with us today to talk about kind of what's new in Podman V3, and I have applied the title architect to him for the project, but I completely made that up. So we'll also ask him what his actual title is on the project, and we'll go through a bunch of different stuff. Brent, do you want to give a quick introduction yourself, and then we'll kind of introduce the show a little more?
Sure. Brent Baude. I'm on the Containers Runtime team and at Red Hat. And our primary focus is on things like Podman, Builda, Scopio, containers, image, and storage, and other associated libraries. I am actually the Podman architect.
Ooh,
and
job,
I'm located in Minnesota, out in the sticks.
Out in the sticks. Okay,
yep.
Cool.
Chris is in Michigan, so it's all flyover as far as I'm
concerned. Thanks. Thanks, buddy. I'll be sure to crap on Boston every chance I get now.
Oh yeah.
And we like Langdon, and we like it that way.
Yeah, exactly. Please fly over us.
Yeah, well, you gotta get the jokes in. Let's see, have I been to Michigan? I think I have been to Michigan. Oh no, I'm sorry, I've definitely been to Detroit and Michigan. I was gonna say Minnesota. I think I've been to Minnesota. But I'm trying to hit that all 50 states one of these days, but mostly it doesn't count as far as I'm concerned if all you do is go to the airport on your way to somewhere else, right? You have to like get out and like go places as well. All right, so let me share our like truly amazing slides as we do each time to try to just kind of introduce the show. This is the Level Up Hour. If you are lost, that's what we're doing here today. And this show is about trying to figure out why containers are interesting and how they might be interesting to you, especially as like a rel admin, say, and you want to, you hear all this buzz or whatever around containers, you got to learn about them someday. So that's what we're here to talk about, is like, help you to learn about containers, but more importantly, show you how awesome they are for your kind of like everyday, even as a like a rel admin job, right? You don't need to be some sort of cloud native software developer or an OpenShift admin or any of those things to really appreciate why containers are super useful just in general. And so that kind of leads us into things like tools like Podman, which is why we're talking about V3 today. So about the show, you can find us on Twitter at Langdon with a 1 and Chris Short, all one word, and 2 S's, as we discussed last time. Yes. And you can also find us in relatively active discussion lately in our Discord, where you can come and ask questions about the various shows or about the technologies used on the shows. And sometimes we know the answer, and sometimes we corral other people to join us to help you with the answer. So please come and join us there. And I assume you're doing the magic Discord button.
Stand by. I'm putting our Twitter handles in, and then I will do the magic Discord button.
Awesome. And then, as I always do, I like to just kind of say, okay, if you want to know more about the Level Up program, which is kind of like a way Red Hat is trying to help our customers kind of level up into containers and in OpenShift in general. And so there's a bunch of like free training and free licensing and stuff like that. So check out the website, Red Hat /Level Up Hour. And then today we have Podman with Brent Baude, and then last episode, which was not last week, right? It was the week before, was episode 28, and you can find the show notes at that link, and I will drop that link into the chat once I find the window that has it, and then I will drop it in there. But so let's go ahead and get started because nobody likes slides.
Yeah, let's get into it.
All right, so my first and hopefully simplest question, or the thing that's been coming up for a lot of people, and we talked about this even a little before the show, is Podman and kind of support for Docker Compose. And just to give a little bit of background, if you are unfamiliar, one of the things we talk about on this show a lot is like, as soon as you start using one container, you start to recognize the need for a bunch of containers to accomplish your goal. And what we refer to that as orchestration. And one of the very popular, and I hesitate to say lightweight, but lightweight or straightforward or simple orchestration models is been this thing's been floating around for a bunch of years. I don't even think it was developed by Docker, called Docker Compose. And it's super useful. You can kind of say, I want a little web server and I want a database server and blah, blah, blah. And then you can just describe all the pieces you need and say, go, and up comes all those containers. And so recently in Podman v3, Podman has grown support for being able to read those same files. I know this is where Brent comes in and tells me how it actually works.
Yeah, I think it's important to also look at how we kind of got here. The decision to support Compose was not taken lightly. It was something we had debated probably for a year and a half.
Oh, wow.
Before even deciding to say, okay, let's do it.
Wow.
And so yes, and that's because of the beliefs around the orchestration model, which I think we'll probably get to a little bit later. But if we made the decision in the Podman 2.x timeframe to go ahead and support the Docker API, the RESTful API. And that was because we were told very clearly by users that it's difficult to get off of Docker and onto Podman, even if they want to, if they've written applications that consume the RESTful API. So we designed this split personality API for Podman that answers to the Docker API, but also has a Podman API that has all the special stuff that Podman has. It wasn't long after that where we were trying to really knock out hurdles for people to use Podman and to use it more production rather than just as strictly as a single development tool. And it became clear with the removal of Docker, shall we say, from RHEL 8, that Docker Compose was really the last bastion to get taken care of. And we were seeing users, and they were rather audible about it, not being able to adopt Podman and or leave Docker without this
investment. Yeah.
Whether you 100% believe that is the case or not, that's the argument, and it's reasonable. So last fall when we had it was even longer ago, but we decided, okay, we got to do this. We got to get Compose in because we want to eliminate all the, for lack of a better word, excuses that prevent people from migrating.
Barriers to entry, hurdles.
Yes, and let's be honest, this is about RHEL 7 and RHEL 8. People can't move to RHEL 8 if they can't get their workload moved.
Right. Actually, I had a question come up on Twitter, literally, I think yesterday, that someone was asking is like, when will Podman v3 be available for RHEL 8? And I was like, don't know. But I said I would ask, and they brought up the great point of, hey, it could be in an app stream, and I was like, oh yeah, I like those. I was very involved in making those happen. So is Podman V3 released already for Rel? I didn't actually go and dig around because I knew we had the show. Do you know what the timeline might be?
This is what happens when you ask a developer who's
right.
3 months ahead about what happened 3 months.
Well, this
before.
is Langdon and I's problem too, right?
Right.
Like
we talk about this all the
living
time.
in the future, but trying to stay in the present, right?
Right.
Like,
I believe 8.4 is the target.
Okay.
For version 3.
Well, luckily it's just between the three of us, and so no one's being quoted here. But
but it's very, very soon. I want to say is it May? I think it's May.
Okay.
Where this comes out.
May? Okay, good.
Yeah. But and fundamentally the goal is to have it land in Rel, right?
Absolutely.
It is not a V3 for Rel.next, whatever that's going to be. It's like in one of the current Rels is where the plan is for it to land. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, actually a V3 version, I think is a release candidate, slipped out through the CentOS, the new CentOS process.
Oh, nice.
On accident. So yeah.
How that happened? Well, never mind. I don't want to know how it happened.
You really don't. If anything that involves Koji is not answers that you want, is
right.
The rule.
Yeah. No.
So actually, it kind of, I was just thinking, we have a show on the channel, actually, the Rel, is it called? The Rel Admin Show, the Rel something show, with McBrien, where you can definitely go hassle him about when Podman V3 will be heading Rel itself. So
you asked a question which I don't think I quite answered, which was your first question. I just gave a little background about how we got there.
Oh, okay.
Now, remind me, what was the specific?
So I was kind of asking, like what's my expectation as a former Docker Compose user or whatever about the future? And for me, what I find actually like most limiting about using Podman without having Compose support is that I find random software on the internet and I want to try it out, and they have provided a Docker Compose file. So like, what's my expectation of, is it 100% compatibility? How, what should I be expecting?
Okay, the rules, so to speak. So for those that maybe don't know, a Docker Compose file is just a YAML structured file, and it's kind of a recipe on how to build and run one or more containers. And it also has the ability to sort of say how they should work together. And the so-called rules for 3.0 are fairly simple. Rootful only. So we wanted to get rootful Podman support of Compose because that's what Docker does. So that's the apples to apples comparison.
Right.
Functionally, one of the areas always is going between Podman and Docker, regardless of Compose, is always going to be Swarm. We don't do Swarm. We'll never do Swarm.
Okay.
Right.
That's not the way we went. So if your Compose file dips into that water, which I don't see a lot of, then we can't digest that. Well, we can digest it. We can't run it.
Right.
Otherwise, it should all work. If it doesn't, it's likely a bug. And as you know, we're quite receptive to those upstream.
Yep.
And so when we see those, we go ahead and fix them right away. Yep.
Actually, and I mean, it stands to reason, right? I mean, I've seen Swarm like next to nothing. Swarm's addition to Docker Compose was really far into the Docker Compose like lifespan. So I'm not all that surprised. I am curious, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say one other thing. There has been some confusion with folks that don't have a straight vision for this. Let's say there has been confusion on their thinking that somehow our Podman can interact with the Docker stores, like the Docker's container runtime where the containers are running, or their image stores. That's not the case. It's a YAML file that gets fed into Podman. It's 100% isolated from Docker,
Right.
except that you run Docker Compose under sudo, presumably, to get this thing going. So there's not actually an interaction between Podman and Docker's backends so that you can see the containers and whatever. All we did is we wired the Docker Compose application, which is a Python application, to Podman's backend.
Oh, so this is not a Podman command.
No, you can if you DNF install Docker Compose on Fedora, you get the Docker Compose, and you just run it.
And it's actually using Podman underneath.
But it's using Podman as its backend.
Oh, wow. Interesting. Okay.
That's the user experience we wanted. So when we say we wired up Docker Compose, what we did is made sure when you run Compose and those API calls go through the RESTful interface, we know what to do with them and we respond.
So it was also, in a sense, right, a really good test of the sufficiency of your REST API implementation.
Unfortunately, it was.
yeah, I can totally see that.
It also forced us our hand on a number of commands or API endpoints that we didn't want to implement. Because for example, a big one was container rename, and with the way Podman was designed, we had a hard, fast belief that a container is a container. It's not mutable. If you want to make a different container that's that name or whatever, you deleted it and you recreated it. But Docker Compose uses rename, and so we had to force to contemplate that. The other thing we had to do is fix some of we had 2 network commands because under that same belief, you didn't really modify a container on the fly. The whole ability to be able to connect a container to a network or disconnect it on the fly was not something we wanted to do. This forced our hand. We now have a Podman network connect and disconnect command because Compose uses that. So it really forced us also to look at a lot of the things we were doing and so the side effect, the net side effect, which is a good thing, is that our CLI became more compatible as well. Catching some of those commands that were on the outer edges.
Right. Oh, yeah, that's neat. So sorry, go ahead.
Lots of stuff happening in the chat right now. Well, I'm gonna start from the easy stuff to the hard stuff. So Plain Risky asked, was volumes one of those? I remember Dan mentioning that Docker would create volume directories if they didn't exist, while Podman wouldn't with Podman Compose.
This has been an ongoing argument. Did Dan tell you that our view of what Docker does is that that's a bug versus a feature?
Right.
I mean, typically in POSIX, you don't create things that don't exist for people. Docker does, we don't. I believe the net end of that was that we should do it for the API endpoint. So if you called in through the Docker API, then we should do what Docker does.
Nice. So next question. Well, just a point of clarification. There's Docker Compose and there's Podman Compose, right? Docker Compose requires root. Podman
Compose is a separate project.
Okay.
And it has a different, I don't know if it has a different file format, but it essentially wraps Podman executable. It doesn't call to its backend like Docker Compose.
Okay. Cool.
Did the Docker Compose, did the original one always, has it always called the API? Because I thought it was a wrapper around Docker too.
Well, I don't know in the very, very beginning, but for the recent years, it's using the Docker Python package to talk to the backend. And I understand that is currently under development, that they're changing that portion as well, they being Docker.
Yeah. Okay.
Now here's the hard question. Podman on Mac. People want that. I get asked for it at least weekly. When will Podman on Mac start working? And I know there's been some effort to kind of help with that.
When will it start working? 2 weeks ago.
There you go.
It started working. A team member, Ashley, and I have been working the last 3 weeks on exactly that.
Nice.
We have a design in mind, a user experience in mind on how this should work, which differs a little bit from Docker, but the user experience in the end is going to be about the same. We've been working on, actually, we're going to allow it. It's part of the Podman command, the way we're building it. So Podman machine will now be a command in Podman. And then, so it'd be like Podman machine, init, start, stop, remove, SSH. That's what we, and list. That's what we have today.
Okay.
That's all upstream in the main branch. It went in after we cut 3.1, which was cut this week. So the 3.1 release is now out, and it's going through the various Fedora isms to get into Baude, and we've got a set of folks that are testing it and giving it the run through.
So it's still using, the plan though is still to use a VM, which is actually running the containers, right?
Yes, actually, we wrote this in a way that the backend, if you will, which could be libvirt, QEMU, libkrun.
Wow.
We wrote this such that we can do, those can be added.
Mm-hmm.
And then users can decide, or somebody, a developer is going to have to decide it's important enough to add it, and then that will become available. The libkrun guys have asked us to make sure that we sort of design it in that way, and we're happy. I mean, it's not really any extra work. We're happy to do that. And so the version we're using right now, it uses QEMU, and we have it working on, the reason I mentioned it was part of a command is because we're sort of developing in Linux. Mm-hmm. It's just kind of faster for us, but we've been also testing and developing on the Apple M1s, and we have it working there as well.
Ooh, I like that. That decision. Yep. So like I'm at this inflection point where it's like I need something device-wise new to do stuff, and I'm trying to figure out where I land, and be it PC or M1 Mac or whatever new iPad Pro comes out next month or whatever. I'm not sure yet. So that's interesting.
I will say they're quite nice.
Yeah, no kidding. That's what I've heard. Yeah. Nothing but good news. Andrew Sullivan on our team has one, and he just is enamored with it and was worried about like graphics performance and everything. And apparently it's no issue.
It has not been. The only issues with taking this live or to GA with the M1 is twofold. We've got two hurdles that we're working on both. One is that there needed to be some, there's a patch set from a QEMU developer that needs to get into QEMU upstream proper and get released, that has some specific enablement for M1s, for the architecture. And the second thing is out of the gate, we're basing this on Fedora CoreOS. That's the VM running underneath. And AArch64 is not a official architecture for CoreOS yet. But we do see that changing very, very soon. So those are the two hurdles we're working on. Even then, we've got a way to work around the fact that it's not official, and there's a mirror we can go grab them from. And so the user experience will be as simple as this. You're going to brew install Podman, mm-hmm. which will bring in the dependencies and whatever else we need. Then you're going to do Podman machine init and hit enter. Okay. And it's going to go grab the default image, uncompress it, and then you're going to do Podman machine start, and it'll boot that, and it'll hold the terminal until it knows it's booted. and then you can do Podman remote or just Podman. And it'll automatically sets up the keys. It'll automatically do what you need to do.
That's awesome.
Yep.
So I thought I saw an article about this exact setup. I cannot remember where. It was a Red Hat property. I can't remember if it was developers or opensource.com, or do you recall by chance? It wasn't you writing it, I think, was it?
What was the article about?
Like Podman on Mac.
Oh.
And like kind of like what you just said in text form.
No,
so.
There's nothing like that yet.
Okay.
There is a Podman. There are several blogs on Podman on Mac on how to use a binary that we compiled to Darwin to interact with a Linux session somewhere else. But we've never talked about it actually physically being on the same machine and us doing all the setup work. And you can understand, you got to think about the barrier here. Podman team's actually quite small compared to Docker Corporation. We didn't really want to get into the virtualization business, the operating system business, to make this all work and wire it all up. That we're kind of putting ourselves a little bit out there, and the hope is that the upstream community will help once we get the initial stuff laid out, like that they'll help us kind of maintain it, because this is probably a little bit beyond what we're going to be long-term capable of doing.
So I have just a quick question in there, which is, do you envision at all that for lack of a better term, that the VM be pluggable? So would I potentially be able to run RHEL CoreOS instead of Fedora CoreOS?
Today, well, so I've done that.
Okay.
But today you can, if you just take the default, we wanted the sort of,
you want that really simple setup
experience, right?
Yeah,
so if you don't do anything, you're going to get Fedora CoreOS. But you can, on the init, you can point it to a URL or a local file and say, I want to use this for my image.
Nice. Because
Very cool.
What comes back for me a lot of the time, right, is, having spent many years as a developer, is like, I really like the things that I'm working on to be as close to production as humanly possible. And if I know I'm running RHEL in production, I don't really like developing on Fedora. Like it might be, it might be my daily driver, but that's not the same thing as the thing I'm deploying to. And, if I'm on a Mac or whatever, right, it's even worse. So, it's kind of interesting to be able to say, oh, you know what? Okay, I'm pretty satisfied with this. I've been using the Fedora CoreOS. It's fast, and it's got some future feature set or whatever. Let me see what it's going to look like with some beta of RHEL.
And that's the developer mindset, because you're wanting to match these two things. For I'll say the more casual user, it's going to be, don't make me figure this all out.
Oh, totally.
Three commands,
Yeah.
And I don't care, as long as Podman responds.
Right.
I don't care what's on the inside, if it's Alpine or Fedora CoreOS or RHEL, whatever. Just make it work.
To be clear, I only want to do that on the very last day of my
of course,
right? Like I want it super easy until then.
And we have also made it such that you can have multiple. So you could have your default one for FCOS, and then you can say, oh, now I want to test it on RCOS and do a Podman machine init and give it a name, RCOS, and then point it to the RCOS image, and off you go.
Nice. Cool. That's very cool.
Yeah.
Now there are so I've given you all the great news. Let me give you the news.
The not so great news?
The news that we're living in right now. A couple of hurdles we got to knock out. Podman has this whole rootless experience. If you think about how that applies to this scenario, you got now a host and a VM. So rootful and rootless on the host, and rootful and rootless in the VM. And what's going to be the deal? So what we've done right now is we've just enabled rootless on the host, rootless on the guest, but that has limitations, primarily in the networking area. Right? We can't open, rootless users can't open networks and use ports they can't create bridge networks. It can't open ports that it's not allowed to. So we're kind of bouncing our way through, how does this really end up working in the end? Because if you're a root user, then you get all this exposure through bridge networking.
Right.
On the other hand, bridge networking is kind of hard, like to program it on the various
or
platforms.
use it for that matter.
Or yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So it's not clear cut. We've still got to venture that way. Volume mounts will be a challenge from host to guest with 2 different OSs and things like this. So we've got things to figure out. There are precedents for all of them. We're just sort of at this stage, it's like minimum viable product. Can we get this working? Is it realistic? And can we get enough out there that people can start to contribute to those things and help us? Because I'm not a Mac OS expert. I can't remember, if it can do this or can do that versus Linux, the 5.4 kernel, or it's
right.
It can get maddening.
Yeah, no, trust me. I have to live in both worlds, kind of. So yeah, just the nature of the beast of live streaming, right? It's easier to stream from a Mac than it is a Fedora rig. Although we have used Fedora quite often on the channel, but
I usually do.
It's right. And it used to be the OS that was the streaming thing before we moved to cloud instances. So yeah, I've fully understand that Linux, Mac, Windows, like you can't keep track of all 3 or maybe even 2. Like it's hard enough with just Linux.
Yep.
So related to this, right? So if people wanted to, at least contribute back bugs, or things like that, like what should they do? Is there like a mailing list they should join? Is there a binary they can go and download and try out now? Or is this, or are you not there yet, in a sense?
We're not, well, we would welcome help. And we have already gotten 2 or 3 pull requests from community who's been watching us. Like sometimes you feel like they're sitting on the wall, kind of creeped over, watching you, and then as soon as you get it in, they pounce. So we get feedback sometimes within hours of PRs going in. That's great, though.
Yeah,
that's creepy, great because it's a little of both, and sometimes you get stuff that you knew you needed to fix, you just hadn't gotten to it yet, which is even better because it's like they're reading your mind. So we haven't changed what you can get from Brew. Brew is still the I'll call the old Podman remote approach where it interfaces with Linux yet. I can't see. Maybe we will. I don't quite have a feeling for what we haven't talked about, this problem with the QEMU patches. Would you actually release to Brew, which is the max install method? Would you release to that when there's a QEMU that wouldn't work for an M1? But it would work for the Intel Mac. I don't know. We got to kind of see where we are with that patch set. We're certainly not going to distribute QEMU on our own.
Yeah, that'd be a little much.
If you want to contribute, if you go to Podman.io, there's a mailing list. We'll take PRs. We really value PRs from the community. We try to give them the first read through of the day rather than a peers. We'll go to something. Dan Walsh was very good about pointing that out. And then really the absolute best place is we all hang out on Freenode in a channel called #Podman.
Nice.
And during the US work time, we are there. 100% of the time. Unless we're in meetings, we're always watching it. That's our primary development communication method. So we don't hide away on Slack or anywhere else. It's right there. Come in, ask a question, sure, but you get our attention when you say, "Hey, I want to fix this bug. What do I do?" We'll hand walk you through that.
Right.
I have been there. I have said, why is this broken? It surprised me that you say US time, actually, just because I know there's a bunch of Europeans on the team as well. But do they tend to be like more on US time generally?
They at least bite off the first half of our US day.
Okay, all right.
So I'm in Central Time.
Those are weird.
One player in particular, Valentin Rothberg, who's in France, he signs off about 11 my time.
Okay.
Thereafter.
Yeah. So one of the things I wanted to talk about too is just, and I know this is, a subject that you're interested in, which is kind of like, oh, sorry, Chris, was there another question in the audience, or do you want to move on to something else?
Let me double check, make sure I got everything. I don't think I'm looking at Discord in the corner. No, there was one question, I think, from 1-2. I'm not sure if it got answered, but I'll double check scrolling through.
Okay. So one of the things I wanted to talk about was okay, so actually, why don't we start here? So when I do the Docker Compose stuff, how is Podman treating it? So is it making a pod that it's putting all the containers in? Is it a separate set of containers? Because obviously that has ramifications for how the communication between the components works, and kind of by extension, if I know it's working in that scenario, how do I mimic that in, for lack of a better term, in production or in, somewhere else that isn't using that technique? And so kind of knowing how it works and then what do I do next is useful.
Sure. When you run Docker Compose, we do whatever Docker Compose asks for. So in the Docker world, that's containers. Docker, to this point, is unaware of what a pod is.
Right.
And in fact, there's no call for Docker Compose through the compatibility layer for a pod. That all sits on the Podman side. Like we have all that extra goodness that we offer. So if you run it, you get what you would in Docker. You get the same network, the same volume, the same containers, the same ports. Everything tries to follow it. If it doesn't, it's probably a bug.
Gotcha.
But I think where you're going is, what do you do then? Like, okay, so you ran it. What do you do? What are some things that you can do with that from someone who writes code for Podman? What do I think? Is that kind of where you want me?
That's kind of where I was going. That's where I was going next. I thought the first answer would be more complicated, to be honest. But it's basically, it's like we're trying. Basically, it's whatever Docker would have done if Docker Compose called Docker. That's a good answer. And
that's what people want. I mean, that in essence is what people want. And now we want them to say, okay, and you got it in the Podman, do something. Give me the extra chocolate and nuts and cherry on top. And so our view is, a good example is I wrote an article with Urvashi and then did a presentation at the Container Plumbing Days that described, okay, we've got Docker Compose now. We already could interact with Kubernetes. How do you get from Docker with Docker Compose to being able to push something into Kubernetes and know almost nothing about Kubernetes? So someone says, oh yeah, you can push your workload here. That's about all you need to know.
Right. And we've
so,
covered that on the show. Like we talked
yeah,
about this before. Like I think that basically being able to set up your whole little pod, right, and say put this container there and that one there or whatever, and then be able to say, okay, now export that is huge. You know, there's a lot of other tools that I wish I could do that with, so that I can kind of I know how I want everything to connect together. I don't always know the YAML whatever to make that true. And
yeah,
so having that export is super handy.
yeah.
And so yeah, that's kind of where I want to go. Is like, okay, now I've got this Docker Compose YAML either from somewhere else on the internet or something that I figured out how to do. How do I get that into Kubernetes?
And um, on that topic, that's where I feel Podman still has plenty of growth, is that assistance from single node to Kubernetes and back. So thinking as a developer, I'm trying to develop this application that's got these pods and containers, and I finally got it working on my laptop the way I want it. How do I get it over there? And today we dump it to a YAML file, and then you take the YAML file and you push it off to Kubernetes. But we think there's still plenty of meat there to make that even better. And we're sort of requirement driven in that way. Users will come in and say, oh, you know, I tried to do this, but you know, you guys don't, when you snapshot the running pods or the running containers, you don't catch this attribute, you know, bug. So then we say, oh, that's not a bug, that's a feature, but we'll put it on the list.
Right.
And then we do that. Actually, of late, people have just given us a PR saying, you don't do it, here it is. And we've been able to just merge it for free.
Right.
So, right. Question in chat. Podman currently supports generating Kubernetes resources based on running setups. Will Podman v3 support converting compose files into Kubernetes resources?
Not in a direct manner. In other words, you have to run the compose file, and then you have your running containers as a result of that. Then you run the kube generate to get your YAML file.
But it won't be quite what it may not be quite what you want because of the lack of pods, right? Because it's doing exactly what Docker told it to do.
Well, we convert those containers into pods depending on how you snapshot them. So let's say you ran a compose file that had, let's say it had 5 containers, and 3 of them were database related and 2 of them were web related. Depending on how you snapshot that, I might say, well, snapshot those 3, snapshot it in 2 pieces, 2 groups. One's database, one's web. You'll get 2 YAML files and then service files if you need them. That way they're sort of organized. But when we do the YAML, it has to be, these containers have to be in a pod, even if it's just one container in one pod. That's the way it has to be, because Kubernetes can't, you know, Kubernetes obviously can't run straight containers. It has to be in a pod as well.
Okay, so I'm not sure if I'm asking this correctly, but like, okay, so inside, so when I say kube generate, or I can't remember exact syntax command, but you get the idea.
Yep.
It's going to wrap the stuff in pods.
Absolutely.
But is it running in pods in Podman?
No.
Okay. That's where so it really is inside of Podman. It looks exactly like Docker told it to look in a sense. But then as soon as you say, hey, I need to go deploy this over in KubeLand, which requires pods, it introduces the pod concept.
Yes.
Okay. So I guess for me as a consumer, right? Like, so what I would actually recommend someone do is kind of generate the cube out of it. And then one of the nice things about Podman, right? And I know I filed a bug about this and hopefully it's getting better, but it's like, then I would want to turn around and run that generated cube files in Podman to make sure that the pods are now set up correctly, because now I have introduced a pretty big difference between what I had running and what I'm proposing to run in Kubernetes. Right?
Yes, and one of the things people struggle with in that, these are things, like I said, that I think we can make better. Mm-hmm. There's still plenty of things to do here. Is most people that aren't familiar with Kubernetes but are familiar with Docker or Podman, they don't really understand the pros and cons of grouping containers in a pod.
Oh yeah.
So the big one that we always get is networking, and how the fact that containers in the same pod share the same network namespace. So what that really means to the containers is, if you have 3 containers in a pod, they can refer to each other by localhost. They're all in the same container network space.
Right.
So this thing about port mapping, so that they can communicate and running on special, you can eliminate all that. That's one of the things that we get. Docker Compose does a really good job of when it runs, it sets up all the DNS for the containers so that they can refer to each other. And we do that too, but there's no need for it when it's in a pod. You could just go straight to localhost or something like that.
Right.
And so that's one of the upsides that people don't quite see, is it's not that hard to actually make this, a nice tightly bound thing. That's why I was saying, put all your database stuff into one pod, and they can just refer to each other at localhost. You don't have to expose traffic, amongst these things.
Right. Yeah. Right. I mean, I don't personally, I think there's the thing that Docker Compose has as an advantage is the simplicity of its YAML syntax. The resultant thing that is running is in some ways a lot less simple. But it's like, and this is kind of to be honest, why I'm a little surprised. And I guess, it's kind of that customer feedback problem, is that I guess I was hoping for Docker Compose syntax resulting in Podman simplicity, in a sense. So that it's a slightly different take on how to implement that Docker Compose kind of functionality. But I can see both sides of that argument very, very easily, and it's just, like I said, that's why I was a little surprised. I didn't quite realize that was the path it went down. So that's cool.
But file an issue, because we are. I wasn't really saying enough, but we are requirements driven. We have ideas on where we want to take really core stuff like security and networking and things that are core to the runtime. But how that always gets ingested and used, we need to hear sometimes.
Right. Totally. Totally.
Specifically, people like Dan and I, we need to hear well, no, this is how I want it to work or look or act, or this is what it should do. And then we can kind of contemplate that amongst all the other things. But it's a conundrum. We talk about it as a team. The team is primarily a container runtime expert. We know about the runtimes, the backends, the APIs, namespacing, C groups v2. We know about those things. To say that we're container experts, it depends on what point you're coming from.
Right.
I don't know how MySQL works with, the MySQL image from Red Hat works with the Alpine image of PHP over here. I don't know.
Well, this is like when I first joined Red Hat, right? I came in as a developer advocate, right? And one of the people, or what I first thought was, hey, I've got, Red Hat has a lot of engineers. I can use those engineers to kind of inform, what kinds of things people want to do and that kind of stuff. And I quickly discovered that no, I can't, because the people who work on building an operating system, the people who work on building a container platform or whatever, are not the same people who build web applications, right? And I'm sure both can, at least in many occasions, could cross over, but certainly not with the expertise that they normally, or kind of the knowledge of the pain of day-to-day operations in the in whatever house they live in a sense.
The great question we get often on IRC, and I smile about it, is, so there's a bunch of us developers sitting out there and someone will come in and say, all right, I'm a noob. How do I wire together these containers? I mean, you might get 12 responses that are completely different on how that should be done. And that's that's why I say that's the conundrum of being a developer stuck between the nitty gritty and I just want this to work at people, right? There's a lot of space in there.
That exact experience, right, is actually why this concept of developer advocacy is actually kind of taken off the last 5 or 10 years. Is because okay, you built this cool thing, but as a consumer of it, how do I use it, right? But so that's super interesting. So we're getting close to running out of time. One thing I wanted to ask you was, okay, we've beaten Docker Compose like a dead horse. What is your favorite feature of V3 that isn't that? What's the coolest thing that you think that people should know about that we haven't talked about yet?
So we're excluding kube generate and kube play.
I don't know. I really like those. So those are really good. And so let's reiterate that people should go look at those if they haven't already.
For me is the number one thing, because I don't think it's used enough, and I think it's a shame, because Docker Compose is the technology that allows Docker and Podman to interact, and YAML, kube is the one that allows Podman and all these Kubernetes backends to coexist, right?
Right.
So anytime you can find that, that's where the powerful stuff is.
And so, are there a lot of improvements in the Kube area of Podman V3? Yeah.
I was looking at the release notes because it was so long ago for me.
Right.
And I was like, wow, there was, we had probably a dozen bug fixes and half dozen new things on Kube between 3 and 3.1. Including 3 and 3.1.
Kube generate episode, because the last one we did would have been, I don't know, early last year. So we should definitely think about doing another episode.
Did Dan talk about the short name stuff?
No, but I did in an episode or two ago, which
was it a good thing or a bad thing?
It's cool once you know it's happening, but at first you're like, what? Where did it come up with this thing over here? At least that was my opinion. The other related one that I thought was interesting is the menu of options if it's not sure which container you want, which was interesting because I found one where all 4 of the options didn't actually exist at the far end. And I was kind of like, well, this is disappointing. Could we have maybe a little bit, and I was thinking about going to file a bug about this, but it's maybe a little bit of checking of that. Is this an actual option, even though it looks like an option? Was kind of funny. And I definitely hit an edge case there. I'm certain. But I thought that was really neat, is the, you said you wanted this, but which one did you really mean? Because I think that's something that catches people a fair amount.
And there was a security element to it. Was that brought to light on why we did it?
No, actually, I don't think. No, I didn't.
So we had this.
I totally just found it as a user.
This use case Yeah, we didn't just do short names to like do a cool menu. The idea behind it is in the Docker world, they're primarily only pulling from Docker IO. That's how that product was designed.
Right.
In our world, with Podman and sort of being open sourced, a little bit more open-minded on where things come from, you can have 10 registries. And by default, we usually ship 2 or 3 enabled.
Right.
Fedoras and, whether it's Quay or Red Hat or, whatever. And so and then Docker IO. What was learned is it is possible that if you type in Podman run foobar, and it went through this algorithm we used to go through an algorithm of trying to find the image. Like we walked each one.
Wow.
And then when we found a hit, we'd pull it.
Right.
And so we never had a case of it, but one of the things we learned is it was possible that a bad actor could put a image in one of these repositories that as it walked it would pull it. And so, the recommendation was, well, now you must pull everything by a fully qualified name.
Right.
In other words,
makes sense.
Docker IO library or Quay.io.
The whole name.
But
I'm lazy.
Our users would howl about that because we just want to do Docker pull Alpine, right? We don't. And so the compromise was to do this, and then it remembers that when I say Alpine, I mean this one over here, so that we can prevent that accidental pulling. That's the genesis of why that work was done.
Interesting. I didn't actually know about the remember part. That is definitely interesting and useful. I think that's another thing maybe I would go kind of file a bug about, though, is that if I then go and turn around and do kube generate, for example, is it going to put in the fully qualified names? I would want it to, because I've now indicated maybe a non-default choice, right? And I actually had this problem in OpenShift. We talked about it on the show of like, I tried to get a particular image. I didn't have the secret set up to get it. And so it silently failed and gave me an alternative, which was completely borked because it was set up completely differently. So that's really interesting. I really like that feature. I thought it was really cool.
I would also be remiss not to tell you guys that 3.1 now includes secrets.
Ooh.
So we did get that in.
Oh, nice.
They're not encrypted. There's still stuff to do.
Yeah.
But it's there and it works. And that came in 3.1.
Nice.
Very nice.
So, like I said, we're nearly out of time. Let's quickly jump to the sweet internet points. And for Brent, who I assume has not watched the show all that regularly, if at all, what we do is we have a fun little game where if you kind of watch episodes and fill in a Google form, you collect points. And then every episode we talk about where people's standings are. And so right now, with 4,700 points, we have Narendev, and then Netherlands Hackham. And mind you, Brent, just by way of context, we completely make up how to say these names.
Absolutely.
So that's fair.
As because the way the form is set up is that I ask for your actual name, but I also ask for a name that you want to be displayed, if you want to be displayed at all. So then we also have Noah Friction at 3,600. And then Joe Fuzz, who I think has been sticking at 2,300. We need Joe Fuzz to come back. And Detective Conan Kudo, who also goes by the Eighth Doctor. I'm not sure which one he is today, but we know him from Fedora Land pretty well. And then Bacon Fork with 800 points.
Bacon Fork.
Exactly. So thank you all so much for collecting those points. I am looking for the correct window to be able to keep today's points, which is here. And so you can go kind of follow the link with the pre-cached or like pre-filled form,
Yeah.
or just go enter it manually. And then the other thing that I do on occasion is today, I just want to call out some new people. So we have Dago Bertz, Pinhead, Tejas Rao, probably 97. Who are some new people to the show, or loose new people to submit for points. For example, JP Dade, who I think is here at most episodes, still has like near 0 points. JP Dade, you could be getting points. And but we like to welcome new people. We hope you come back. We hope you found the episode interesting. A couple of quick points I would just make about past episodes. We have Jeff. I went and looked it up. It's in the chat. But we started covering Podman Cube Generate in like episode 7. It sounds like maybe we should do a new one using V3, which would be kind of cool.
Yeah.
Because I think it's a super cool feature. I agree with you, Brent. It's like highly unknown, and it really needs a lot more surfacing, because I think even if you aren't going to Cube, the ability to generate that YAML and then replay it even in Podman is so much like the feature set of Docker Compose that it's totally worth it, whether you're using Kubernetes of any kind at all. So yeah, I strongly recommend it. Thank you again for being on the show. Thank you for all the hard work. We really appreciate it. Is there anything else we should cover, Chris, or should we?
Well, there's a very generic question here from MS that just says Podman versus Docker with respect to security. I asked for more clarification. I'm hoping to get some. But
want me to answer it?
Sure. I mean, if you think you can answer that question, go ahead.
The only rule we have on the show is that the level up hour can never actually be an hour. So perfect timing.
Perfect timing. Yeah.
It's without a doubt Podman is the more secure, and it's based on its design. So if you just look at rootful versus rootless right out of the box is more secure. But also, Dan Walsh is a big part of Podman, and
SE Linux.
He's Mr. SE Linux. Yep, he's got stuff nailed down, and the way we do things is just outright more secure. Cgroups v2 and all those things are contributing to that, and it's only going to get better or tighter as things go.
One thing I want to point out too is that I think a lot of people don't realize that they're running Docker in a rootful
state.
Because when you install it and set it up, most directions about setting it up actually have you, if you know sudo, right? It's basically doing a sudo without a password model on creating your Docker images. So like for a long time, I used Docker and didn't know that I was actually operating as root.
Yeah.
So
and why is that bad, Langan? Why is running containers
and why is that
bad?
Because then stupid people like me give way too much power to the inside of that container. And if you break free of the container, which sometimes you want, like, you let it do, right? I use application containers all the time. And so I'm giving it access to my file system on a regular basis, and giving it as root is a whole lot different than giving it as my normal user.
Absolutely.
And the reason I use sudo is because I almost never use the root user, and so that I don't accidentally rm-rf/ right. So like, I mean, it's nice that RM actually has a built-in that it's hard to do that now. But that's kind of the point, is like, I'm operating this piece of software as non-root because I know I screw that kind of thing up regularly.
Right.
When an app makes me think that I'm non-root, but I'm actually root, that's very, very dangerous for me. So that's one of the things that I think people don't realize about Docker.
Yep. And by the way, that's one of the biggest issues or complaints against Podman, which is a bit unfounded, is we get users that have been running Container X on Docker for 3 years, and then they run it in Podman as rootless and it doesn't work. and they, KubeCon Podman because of it. And then when you start asking questions, well, that container needs to map to a port less than 1024, or that container is doing something that's privileged and therefore does have to be run as root. That's not something Podman's not gonna fix that for you. So we always say, if it fails as rootless, try it as root. If it works as root, then go back to rootless and figure out what privilege is required and see if you can overcome that hurdle.
So it's like just adds the list of set and force 0, try it again, right? If it works.
Yeah, there's a list.
Force 1, right?
Yeah.
If the firewall, turn off the firewall, see if it works, right? Turn it back on. If try your pod or try your image as a root podman, and then that's funny. I don't do that. Generally speaking, I find the error messaging is sufficient to kind of say, oh yeah, I am doing something that requires root or whatever. But that is a good tip. I'll definitely keep that one around. I like it. All right, Chris.
Awesome. Yeah, I think we're good. I think all our questions have been answered. If not, there is a Discord channel, folks. Please join us.
We can make Brent come back.
We could make Brent come back if there's enough questions. Absolutely. And when in doubt, check out our calendar, and don't forget, folks, Red Hat Summit is coming. I'm sure everybody on the channel has some hand in it this year.
Keep an eye out. We're going to be doing a teaser show on the Level Up Hour with some big name guests for both Summit and KubeCon, because they're back to back.
Yeah. I'm in the race to KubeCon right now. Speaking of KubeCon, did you want to mention anything about that?
Yeah, duh. So we are doing. We're going to give away some tickets to KubeCon.
Yeah, we have some tickets.
And we are going to take a slightly different tack, in a sense, than the general internet points tack, which is what we're asking people to do is post somewhere on the social media, pick whichever one you like the best, that something cool you learned on the Level Up Hour. Then give us a link to it in the Discord and say, this is what I posted about the Level Up Hour, or whatever. And then so for every time you do one of those social media posts and then link to it in the Discord, so I don't have to follow all of the socials forever, that's why we're asking you to put a link to it in the Discord. You'll get an entry into our little raffle to give away a few KubeCon tickets that we were able to secure. And so we can hopefully support you going to KubeCon. We also may be giving out a couple of KubeCon tickets to some of the biggest, what do we call it? Biggest proponents of the channel.
Yeah.
And so, so you can win multiple ways, in a sense, but definitely want to use this is an opportunity to share what you've learned, and you should see some tweets from me over the next few days, and I think I even started using the hashtag share what you learned in there, because I'm a nerd. But yeah, so hopefully we'll have a fun little contest, and you will also get internet points for joining the Discord if you weren't already joining the Discord. So that is what we're doing to give away a few KubeCon EU tickets. And we only have 2 weeks. So you have from today,
2 weeks,
and then not next show, right? But the show after that. And we'll give away the tickets, or we'll announce it. We'll do the public-private thing like we do for the internet points during that episode.
Cool.
That was super complicated.
Yeah. So folks, the gist of it is, share something you learned on the channel, post a link to it in the Discord
before April 14th.
Okay, cool. Just wanted to make the nice short sweet package there for everybody.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There you are, the short guy. So
you should give away tickets to Red Hat Summit. That's a good point. We should. We didn't get on top of that in time.
To be clear, Summit is free. So
right.
we are giving you all tickets. So just remember, you got them here. The Level Up Hour gave you a free ticket to Summit.
Yes, you got them here. All your free tickets are for you for Summit. Yes. All
I
right.
hope I'm right. I'm like 99.9% sure, but now I have a panic attack that I'm wrong, but I believe it to be free.
All right. So with that being said, I feel like we're good here. Brent, thank you very much for coming on. Thank you to the audience for participating as always. We've already had
Awesome.
100 messages in chat today, which always makes me happy, especially when it's in one show. And we will see you next week. What are we talking about next week? Do you remember?
What are we talking? I opened it already, so I should know. Let's see.
I can pull it. Let's see if my
We are
calendar
talking
works.
about, oh, we're supposed to be doing Podman V3 stuff next week with just the two of us. So
Got
we
it.
will definitely light something on fire.
Yeah, something will definitely break.
Then we're supposed to be doing a deep dive into the UBI with Mr. McCarty. And then the one after that is when we do that tease show with some pretty big guests, which as soon as we can, like probably later this week, we will be announcing those guests, and we'll actually be teasing a little bit of another show that Red Hat produces, and then kind of going into a deeper dive on what that show's about.
And that is a great hint as to who the guest may be.
Exactly. Especially the summit and KubeCon part is also
right.
a hint.
Yeah.
So thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank y'all, and stay safe out there. Don't forget to do your points and register, or post accordingly as we've prescribed for free tickets to KubeCon.
Exactly.
Yep. Thank you again, and we will see y'all next time.